Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification course. All of you that are in the auditorium can be seated. Welcome all of you that are watching online. Hola, mi amigos. I know you were messaging me right before the class. It's great to have people in many countries letting you know, hey, we're tuning in, we're watching. And it's not just, south of us. We have many people all around the world watching these classes. A lot of close friends have been made and people we've never met in person, but we're virtual friends, so to speak. You know, technology's become a wonderful thing in some aspects and it's a hindrance in some aspects. But as far as, all of us learning this program of the Peaceful Solution Character Education program, or the program itself, and being able to send a book where we used to, I remember one time we sent a case of books to Nairobi, Kenya. It cost $980 and it took 38 days. Now we can actually just email a PDF copy of it and they can print it out themselves there in less than a minute. So it's great to be able to get these things, and you can download them online now. We have them all set up there, and soon the Respect unit will be up because this is the last chapter that we're going to be into of the Self-Control unit. Then we're going to be in the Respect unit. So you'll see the link to download in the next few weeks where you can download the Respect unit. And if you're wanting to buy one, make sure you buy a teacher's unit. We always encourage everyone. Some people are not aware that there's teacher and students, but you're going to need the teacher's unit for these classes because it has the lesson plans, the note to the teacher. It gives a lot of guidance in the teacher's manuals that aren't necessarily in the student's manuals. In fact, they're not at all in the student's manuals. So make sure if you need a book and you're going to be acquiring one, make sure to ask for the teacher's manual. But for tonight, be turning over to Lesson Plan 7, page C. David was in Procedure 2, and we're going to pick up where he kind of left off, recover a little bit where he got a starting point there on Chapter 7. He gave a lot of great examples, and we're going to talk about some of those examples he gave and some that Catan gave moving into this with technology and how technology has changed, but has it changed for the better? Now we're going to look at a lot of photos tonight concerning our environment. Because a lot of times when people think about the environment, they think about the exhaust from cars, the exhaust from jets. Oh my heavens, someone's burning a wood stove. Look at that smoke coming out of the chimney. Something they've been doing for thousands of years. Now it's a problem. Well, we're going to look at see what is it that is, pollution is much deeper than what we think. When we truly look at what pollution is, and how it affects society, it opens up a much wider perspective of what it means to put pollution into the environment. But if you'll be going ahead here, LP1C, we're going to look at Procedure 2. And that's what David was in last class. And it says, tell students that in the final lesson in this unit, they will explore some ways society has polluted, and notice, contaminated, the air, water, and food supply. Air, water, and food supply. One thing I want you to think about, whenever disease is transmitted, it's transmitted through the air or it's transmitted through liquid. Everything needs water to live, to survive, even disease. That's why it can thrive in stagnant water. But also in the food, how does it get there? Well, instruct students to read the section entitled Introduction and Just What is Pollution, found on pages 187 and 188. Allow students time to complete the exercise on page 189 and have students share their ideas with the class. And it's very important. What we're talking about here is sharing ideas. Be turned over to page 187. Sharing ideas, because that doesn't mean that they're going to have the right answer. What you're asking for is, what are their ideas? We're going to be working toward learning what exactly is polluting our environment and how can we as a society learn to eliminate these things. And remember what a society is. It's a group of people that live according to a common body of laws. They all live in agreement with these laws and they do things that keep them safe. And of course, if somebody steps outside of those rules that keep us safe, then not only can you have crime take place, but you can also have disease take place. And we're seeing that here even in the last few years with COVID, which has made a huge impact on society as far as rule changes. You know, governments are starting to relax. Canada is starting to relax its border. The United States hasn't done it for non-U.S. citizens yet. But other countries like Mexico, never implemented anything. They were come as you are and it's okay. And when you look at these countries and how they kind of fared, the ones that implemented no restrictions didn't do any worse than the ones that implemented heavy restrictions. Nobody was able to stop the COVID virus. The ones that implemented extremely heavy restrictions didn't fare any better than the ones that just let it go, let it spread, and we'll all figure it out in the end. So whether they tried to hide themselves from it or not, it spread. It pretty much covered where it was covering, and it's still spreading. You know, it's kind of slowed down for right now, but I'm sure everybody's seen it comes in phases. But we're learning that once a contaminant is put into society, and we can call it a pollution, once it's put into society, you can't hide from it. You have to learn how to live within it and avoid and do the things that can be done to protect yourself. And if you've already eaten supper, have a trash can close by tonight, because you're going to see some stuff that will probably help you regurgitate it. If you haven't eaten, you probably won't eat tonight before it's over with. If you don't have a weak stomach, you'll be okay. But there's some things, there's going to be a lot of photos in tonight's class. Some of them are to burn images into the minds of people so they understand a lot of pollutions and contaminants cannot be readily seen with the eye. They hide themselves deep within the body until they make themselves known on the surface. And once they make themselves known on the surface, it's a very ugly picture. And, you know, some of them, many of them easily spread. And then, of course, we're going to talk about how we live in a world that's bathed in something. We'll get to that as we move through. But here on page 87, let's go back and we're just going to reread this really quickly. David did a great job of covering and adding some things into this. So for an in-depth explanation on this page, go back and read or watch the last class, because David did a great job of going in and pulling out certain parts of tying together of what's going in our society today and what's taking place in our society today. But we want to have this fresh in our minds to build on the next page and what we're going to discuss tonight. But here at the very top of page 187, it says, practicing self-control goes beyond you and me, or even society. It encompasses the whole world, encompasses the whole world and all that is essential for life. And it's important to remember, it's important to encourage your students to know this. I learned this in biology class when I was in the 10th grade. I also remember when I took world science in the 8th grade, it was pressed in my mind, but biology class really helped solidify it. And then when I came to the Peaceful Solution, the author of the Peaceful Solution really helped to understand the earth is a living thing. It's not just an entity that has no life. There's trillions and trillions of kingdoms within our world. Not like the kingdom where in England, where it just switched over from the queen to the king, but kingdoms of microbes, you can call them bugs. It's not just us humans living on Earth. There's a lot of other things that are living along with us that actually help keep us safe, or they actually help our life terminate, depending on which way we've interacted with some of these things. Keep that in your mind as we're reading through this, because it would be helpful for all teachers to introduce their students into micro kingdoms. What exactly are microbes? How do they interact with humans? What are parasites? What are viruses? How exactly do diseases spread? All of these are truly part of what we're covering in this chapter with self-control and the environment. There is so much more than the theory of exhaust destroys the atmosphere. There are many, many lives lost every year due to contaminants that are spread from person to person or from person to item, to thing, to person, and it doesn't involve, fuel in a car, burning wood in a stove. It doesn't involve all the jets that they fly over to the climate Paris Agreement every time they hold a meeting there, and they have this huge forum, and all the jets go flying there, and they tell people how they need to reduce their burning of fuel. It's also important to educate your students. When I was in school, there was a huge thing about fossil fuel. I still hear it today. Politicians use this word a lot. But scientists and most people, I know quite a few people that deal in the oil business, and I mean they own the oil wells. And living out here in West Texas, you meet a lot of people that actually are the ones that they're owners of these things. They all know that it's not fossil fuel. This oil does not come from dead dinosaurs. It's produced by the earth. That's what generates this oil. It's actually produced. It's something the earth manufactures itself. And the author of The Peaceful Solution once one time challenged those who call it fossil fuels. For one, that would have been an enormous amount of dinosaurs that would have had to die. I mean, an enormous amount. But one of the challenges he said to those who still call it fossil fuel was try to pump all of the oil back into the earth that you've taken out in the last 100 years. You wouldn't be able to do it. In Saudi Arabia, they're very smart to this, and they laugh at most Americans who teach fossil fuel, because we're one of the very few countries that are still calling it fossil fuel, by the way. Most people do not call it that. They call it combustible fuel. But I was at an event, and I met someone from Saudi Arabia, and he was telling me, he said, "You Americans are very funny." I said, "Why so?" Because I didn't know what he was going to say. He goes, "When you were in school, did they tell you that oil was made by dinosaurs?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I want to tell you what we do in Saudi Arabia. We'll pump our wells down to 10%, and we have a lot of wells, and we'll cap it. And we'll come back in 10 years through a rotation, and that well is back to 75 to 80%. Now, unless some dinosaurs have crawled in that well after we capped it and died, it refilled itself." And he laughed. He goes, "We've never taught such ignorance in Saudi Arabia." And, and I remember the first time I heard that it wasn't fossil fuel, I thought, oh, something's got to be wrong. All the textbooks I read going through school said that. And now you can even watch the news, and people on the news will tell you, no, it's not fossil fuel. So when you hear somebody say fossil fuel, research it for yourself. It's like saying that you're drinking clean water from your tap. We'll get into that tonight too. But here on page 187, chapter 7, Self-Control in the Environment, the introduction. It says, "So far, you have learned how to practice self-control when interacting with others." And even in this chapter, we're still talking about interacting with others. When we talk about the environment, it's not just the wind, the rain, the sun, the dirt. It's also those who we encompass. When you go into a school, you have a huge environment in the school. When you go into a Walmart, a Lowe's, a Home Depot, or anywhere else, that's an environment that's been created there. And everybody that goes in, and doors have become automatic on these big stores for a reason, but they haven't been able to get past the shopping carts. And we're going to discuss what we're talking about here shortly, but everybody leaves something. Everybody. Whether it's the snot you're wiping off your nose and then grabbing the shopping cart, or the person that used the bathroom that didn't wash their hands very well and they leave their residuals, which, when you go into a Walmart, and we tell all of the students this, and this is not hard to figure out, research it yourself, you see those hand sanitizers and wipes at not just Walmart, but other big box stores. Well, why is it there? Because when their carts were tested, over 80% of their carts have fecal matter on them. And for you young men, that's poop. Most people don't wash their hands very well. And they let you can wipe your cart completely down. And I've seen that at Walmart a lot, where people will grab a cart and they will wipe it down completely. Why? Because they realize the environment they're in. And we're going to talk about how things are spread through people not keeping themselves clean. That's part of our environment. and we're talking about pollutants and contaminants. Well, continuing on, it says, you have been given tools to assist you in identifying positive and negative influences and how to maintain self-control in the midst of it all. Part of maintaining self-control is keeping yourself clean from these things. Keeping your hands, instead of just slapping it on there and then wiping it all over your face, clean off the shopping cart. I would rather someone look at me like a goofball, seeing me scrub a shopping cart, than find out that I wiped, because if you think it's just one person that put something on that shopping cart that day, you're severely mistaken. Who knows how many people that you're wiping things on your face. And one thing we learned from COVID is we as a society love to touch our face. Because I remember when they said, when you do something, you got a mask on, don't touch your face. I never realized how much I touched my face until I tried to be mindful of touching my face. And it wasn't COVID I was worried about. It was everything else my hands were touching I was worried about. I've seen many people go into stores wearing latex gloves. I remember when people used to laugh at people wearing masks. People still wear masks even to this day going in stores. But I commend anyone that protects themselves and their families against this garbage. Someone can laugh at you or do whatever they want, but when you're the one not getting sick, in the end, it's worth the ridicule. Continuing on here, it says, you've also learned that crimes which result from a lack of self-control affect our society and put the safety and well-being of all people at risk. And we see that in many aspects of society. In this final chapter, we will expand the concept of self-control to include the environment. We will explore ways in which our choices pollute and contaminate our air, water, and food supply. Very important to underline that it's our choices that do this. It's not a magical thing. It doesn't just jump out on you. It's our choices. And sometimes this is something that we have to understand. The author of The Peaceful Solution worked very hard to get this into our minds. When you make a choice, you don't always see the repercussion or the fruition of your choice immediately. Sometimes it can take days. Sometimes it can take years. But eventually, you will see the end result of your choice. We will see the end result of our choice, our choices. And as a society, we're seeing them already. And some of these were years in the making. Well, the word environment, back to page 187, encompasses all living things as well as the atmosphere, soil, and all bodies of water. So once again, that's why I encourage teachers, introduce your students into the microbe kingdom that's in the soil. There's still so many things that's in the ocean that have never been explored. There's many things that take place in the atmosphere as far as with clouds and rain. And, well, where does the rain come from and where does it go? How do we always have rain? How do the oceans continually stay full? Why does this salt water rise from the ocean, and when it drops down on us, why is it fresh water? How is it that the rivers stay clear and clean, free of salt, but the oceans are always full of salt? These are things that students should learn, because you can't take a fish out of salt water and throw it in fresh water and expect it to live. It's the wrong environment. It doesn't have the right ingredients. Or you can take things and throw them in the clear water, or the salt water, and you can kill both because it's a contaminant that nobody can live in, including a human. And we'll look at some of that tonight. But introduce them to these microbe kingdoms. Talk about parasites, talk about disease, talk about how things are spread. The earth is the only home we have, and we rely on it to provide us with everything we need to sustain our lives. If it's a living entity and we need it to live, we should learn to treat it with some respect. It's not like something, you kick around, you smack it around. Well, I don't do my wife like that because she'll leave me, or I don't do my husband like that because she'll leave me. Well, the earth has been kicked and smacked around for quite a few thousand years now, and it's about ready to leave us. And that's not even bringing up what has been going on at the United Nations for the last week with everybody promising nuclear war. I dare say that will be a little bit more than running your gasoline cars. And we will all get to see the effects of that. And before this chapter is over with, we will get into the nuclear part of that also, because that's a real part of life. That's a real part of society. And I hope everybody takes this serious when they're talking about nuclear war. It's a very real part of society. And for someone to go, no one would do that. We've already done it with atomic weapons. It's already been done. The question is, who's going to do it again? You don't build these weapons for no reason. When you feel like you're being bullied and pushed enough, you're going to use them. And I have no doubt that we're going to see them used because of the pressures that's put on society. I have no doubt in my mind we'll eventually see them used. But let's try to work on ourselves here. We can't control what world leaders are doing, but we can't control what we're doing. So once again, continuing on, with the earth being the only home that we have, it says, in return, we have a responsibility to care for this beautiful planet, for we are the caretakers of the earth and are obligated to preserve its resources for future generations. You know, sometimes society is very selfish and we only think about ourselves. We don't really think about the generations that lie ahead. We only care about what we want, what's in our life, and how it affects us. That's very selfish, and that's very much negative character. When we do something, we should always have a mindset and an outlook on how we're affecting not only ourselves, others, and the generations that will come after us. So notice once again the word choices. What choices have individuals and society made that have negatively affected our environment? Will there be any long-term effects on our resources and on our health? Only time will tell. Well, time has told a story so far. You know, we can have things that we know are negative, and politicians can go to Washington, D.C. in our country. You know, different countries, they go to different places to make up rules and laws. But if something is negatively affecting society, if it spreads disease and it kills people, passing a law saying it's perfectly acceptable to do it does not make it less deadly. And that's something that many people don't tend to comprehend. It's my right to do this, which might be your right to do it, but you're still going to die. It's sick. It's a disease. You're actually spreading disease. When you do something you know is going to kill you, society defines that as suicide. And if you're doing things that you know are going to eventually take your life, well, you only live once. You might as well do it, right? Well, think about, there's a wide variety of topics that could be pulled into, but just think about pollution and contaminants. Turning over here to page 188, it says, just what is pollution? And of course, you see all the garbage there rotating around the equator there of the earth. And it says, pollution is the contamination of the environment with waste material. And not just garbage. You know, think about how us humans throw our waste material around everywhere. Pollutions cause potential damage to the environment, human health, and overall quality of life. Pollutants can be basically placed into two categories. Now, you have natural pollutants and man-made pollutants. And then we're going to show some tonight, photos of some things tonight that were natural events, but it took man to do it, to get it started, and then it kind of got out of control. If you could pull up the first slide as we're reading this natural pollutants. Here on page 188, it says, natural pollutants such as sewage decompose usually over a period of time. Naturally occurring pollutants will not cause excessive harm to life because the earth has the ability to repair itself. Now, that's if it's done properly. You know, the decomposition of sewage, if you're studying the microbe kingdoms, is supposed to be put into the ground, and it's supposed to be, there's microbes that can actually process these things. But society has bypassed it. If you could put that same slide back up, it says natural pollutants, occurring pollutants include, so these are some natural ones, ash, soot, sulfur dioxide, ground level ozone, also known as smog, salt spray, volcanic and combustible gas, and radon. These pollutants are released during volcanic eruptions, forest fires, and grass fires. If you go to the next slide, it talks about air quality. And there's things that naturally affect the air quality. And you'll have volcanoes, forest fires, windstorms, plants, live and decaying, soil, which contains viruses, dust also, and then salt particles. But going over to the next slide, you're going to see this is an eruption of a volcano. And as you look at that, you can see the enormous amount of soot, the energy that's being produced from this eruption. And go to the next one. And here you see another volcano that's erupting. And once again, this is an enormous amount of energy, an enormous amount of soot and ash. And this is all being dispersed into the environment. And then the next one. And once again, these are just three. Now, the volcanoes are erupting every day in the world. All around the world, these things are taking place. Now, there's a huge debate right now, and science hasn't solidified whether it's going to say yay or nay. It depends on which side of the climate agreement they're on. There's many scientists that say that volcanic eruptions put more emissions into the air than all automobiles and human man-made gases can be created by mankind. And there's scientists that say, no, it's only a small part of it. But the one thing that no one disagrees on, these eruptions, due to the kingdoms that are in the earth, these micro kingdoms we talked about, they're able to process everything that the volcanoes spew out. They can process it. So these are natural pollutants, but they're also naturally processed. And they're processed in a way where they're not contaminating, hurting, or destroying. These are things that just naturally occur on Earth, and the residuals of this are not hurting unless, of course, you live at the foot of the volcano and you get an ash bath or something like that. That's a little bit different. I'm not talking about that. If you're going to say that, then those of you that live up in Canada right now going through the hurricane, you'd have to blame water. You'd have to call that a pollutant or something. But, of course, you see the energy dispersed and how these things take place. Looking back over to page 188, because there was a huge event that took place in the United States about 90 years ago that was a natural event, but yet was man-made. And here's man-made on number 2 of page 188. It says they either decompose slowly or not at all. Once they contaminate the environment, it's virtually impossible to remove them. Although some pollution is a result of natural causes, such as eruption of volcanoes that spew enormous amounts of smoke and ash into the atmosphere, and you've just seen 3 of them, there's a lot more than that. The majority of pollution is the result of human activity. Now, if we can put up the next slide, I want to show you something that was a natural occurrence. Those that live in the United States know this as the Dust Bowl that took place between 1931 and 1938. Here in the United States. The author of The Peaceful Solution was born in the midst of the Dust Bowl, and he actually lived through this, so he actually had stories to tell about this. But going to the next slide, you see these huge dust storms. They would swallow up a town. And moving on to the next slide, you see where they even had to make masks for their faces. Some of them would take rags. People in that time were pretty poor. And you grabbed a rag and you got it wet and you wrapped it around your face and you went with your day. But you can see how these things are just arising over towns and they're totally swallowing up the town. Well, how is it man-made but yet natural? Well, as Ken Burns made documentaries explaining the Dust Bowl, Melt White, whose father was a huge figure of the Dust Bowl in Delhart, Texas, they made a film showing how they introduced tractors into the land instead of horse plow or team plow. And they took these tractors and, as in his words, they literally raped the land. They broke so much what's called virgin soil, that soil that had never been broken before, and they broke enormous amounts of it to try to make as much money as they could to harvest wheat. They had a slogan back then, wheat will win the war, and they were talking about World War II. And they broke up an enormous amount of land. And then the windstorm started coming. And it blew all the topsoil away and even started picking up the dust. Now, these storms were so strong, if you study it and get with your students, educate them on these things. there was dust that were left from Kansas and Oklahoma that were found on ships in the Atlantic Ocean. Not just a little bit, but an enormous amount. Day became night. But this was due to a natural occurrence of a wind current that started coming through. But it started because man decided to break up all of this topsoil, an enormous amount of topsoil. Where it was held together by grass, it no longer had anything to hold it down. But then if we could look at our next slide, and of course, when you think of man-made pollutants, this is what you usually see. This is what, everybody, man-made pollutants, blame it on someone other than ourselves. And if we could go to the next slide, this is another, you look at all of this, exhaust going up in the air. It doesn't compare to a volcano in any which way, shape, or form that spewed up in the air. But this is what a lot of people are blaming these things on. Keep that in your mind. Are these things detrimental to the environment? Some of it could be, absolutely. Some of it could be. Look over to page 189, and then we're going to get back into some more of our slides. But here on page 189, at the very top, the activity, and this is very important that you let the students have freedom to write down what they think. It says, use lines below to list some of the ways you think our environment is being polluted. Now, the reason I say that, because we've already covered in detail about how influences are very powerful. Never underestimate the power of an influence. We learned that in the character unit. And then we went through how music, television shows, video games, how all of these things influence us to do things and to make choices in ways that we don't really think of the consequence when we're doing them. Because the movie actor, well, he died on this movie, but now he's in this movie, so he's alive again. He didn't really suffer a consequence. Or this lady, she slept with 10 different people so far in this one movie. She seems healthy to me. What takes place in society? Well, when they write their answers down, of course, we have some here that could be given. If you really want to know what your students think. Notice it says by getting rid of waste materials that cannot decompose into rivers and lakes, oil spills, excessive use of fuel burning, creating carbon monoxide in the atmosphere. I would dare say that if you lock your garage and you crank your car in your garage, yes, that would probably destroy, that would be a bad situation. I want to challenge everyone with the contaminants that are being spread by mankind. As we go through this, which ones do we see the effects of readily? And we're going to get into the things that spread and contaminate and destroy lives, and it has nothing to do with the emission of anything. You can have an EV, electrical vehicle or not, doesn't affect it. If you go to the next slide, this is something that David brought out, and he did a great job talking about it. This, of course, this is a water well that's been turned into a flower bed, but years ago, this is how they got water. You had a bucket, you lowered it down, and you got your water from the well that was down in the aquifer. And if you go to the next slide, they advanced a little bit and they moved up to hand pumps, and you could pump that water out, and the well was sealed, so all the water you got was fresh and clean. You didn't have to worry about contaminants as long as you didn't get anything back down in the well. But this is how they got water just up until like 110, 120 years ago. I'm going back because we're in the 2022. But I knew of houses back in the 40s, 30s, and 40s that still had hand pumps. This is how they got their water. So we live in a society to where we think it's always come out on the faucet. And if you look over to the next slide, this is pretty much how David was explaining. He showed solar panels pulling up water, which those are really neat. I have one of them myself for irrigation. It's all ran off solar. There's no electricity whatsoever involved. But you can see here, and this is important for your students to see, a lot of people do not know what an aquifer is. When you drill a hole in the ground, they don't realize there's a river that runs underground. It's called a water aquifer. And here you see how our modern day house, how you have the well pump. You see the well screen and submersible pump, how it's put down into the water, it pulls it up, goes into a pressure tank, the big white tank in the basement, and then it comes through the faucet. Going over to the next slide there. This is how people think. This is where most people think water comes from. You flip up the handle, and that's the water comes out to speak it. It's kind of like when you take a person, a city person, to go to the dairy barn. And they finally realize, it finally hits them where cow milk comes from. And they're like, oh, it don't look that clean now. But yeah, it's a process. But now I want you to think about, when we're talking about people that were pumping out hand pumps, and we think, man, we've grown a lot in society. If you could bring somebody from the let's say 1860s, 1870s, back then it was considered disgusting to have a bathroom in your house. That's why they had outhouses. It was outside of the house. You had to leave the house to go outside, and they had a hole dug, and they used that. Now, a lot of people today would think an outhouse is one of the most disgusting things a person could ever use. Now, I want you to imagine you have somebody from today having a debate with somebody from then, back in 1860. And the person in 1860 would be saying, I would never have a bathroom in my house. No, it would be outside. That's where we used it. And we buried it after that. And somebody, oh no, we've advanced so much. We've grown so much. Now it's inside the house, and we have running water. We had wells too. Oh, we don't even use wells anymore. If you could go to the next slide, where does your running water come from? Oh, we flush our toilets, those bathrooms we have in the house, we flush it right out in the river. If you remember, Catan said that's not chocolate water. Notice it says, what happens when raw sewage is dumped directly into water? Now, you're still having a conversation with that person from the 1860, and we just flush our toilets, it goes out in the river. Well, what do you do with it after that? If you go to the next slide, well, we send it to really smart people, and they clean it up for us. See the one cup, yeah, it has poop on the bottom of the glass, but he puts a chemical in it. They run it through a slurry machine, and they clean it all up for us. And going to the next slide, it's not just one city doing it. All the cities are doing it. Everybody's drinking their own toilet water. Now, we're telling them we've advanced in technology. We're telling them that we've moved along. And then we show them, if you go to the next slide, see, we'll give you samples. These are our glasses here. This is one where we kind of, over all the way to the left, this is how we flushed it down, then we put a chemical in it, it kind of darkens it, but look how clear it is when we're done. I can imagine, so you put it back in your toilet? No, we drink it. You really don't have a choice. It comes in your water line, and it goes to your toilet, it goes to your faucet, you take a bath in it. Now imagine them asking you, so you're bathing in water that you flushed down your toilet that had fecal matter and urine in it, you're bathing in that. Yeah. Do you really think they'd want a part of this society? They'd probably be like, I'm so glad I had never had technology. But this is a part of society that we live in. This is a part of society that, if you watch the news, and if you haven't, get involved in looking at how, when they test for polio in New York right now, where did they go test for it? They went to the city sewer system. Why? Because when the body eliminates disease or contaminants, it's eliminated, processed through the body, and it comes out in the waste byproduct. Either urine or fecal matter. Most of the time it's fecal matter or poop. And that's what's processed out. That's where they're testing for COVID to see if they're having outbreaks. They literally go to the place that's going to supply your drinking water future down the road after they clean it all up. And we've been to water treatment plants, and we had the privilege of going through and seeing how it's done. And I tell you, we went to one that the water was pulled out of the Rio Grande River. And this was the interesting part. Now, the guys that gave us the tour, they were really great. I have to tell you, I was impressed with them. They were very respectful, very educated. And, I'm looking at the Rio Grande River, and I'm thinking, and I asked them, so the rules that Mexico has about what they can throw in the water, since we have this river, and if you go to the other side, that's Mexico, how do our rules affect what goes in the water? He goes, well, we have rules that say you can't dump chemicals. Well, does Mexico have those rules? No, they dump chemicals. But you're pulling water out of the same river here. You're both sharing this river. We clean it up. And they took us from the process all the way down at the river, and we got to go through and see the whole thing. And at the very end of it, you know, I won't say what city is in because the guy was really great, and I don't think they'd really want him telling this. But after he got done and he showed us the clear water, I said, drink it. He goes, I'm not drinking that. I said, why? He goes, you know, if you don't get that stuff really, really clean, it gives you a bacteria in your gut, and it makes you really sick. And I thought, that's interesting. But I also know when I go into Mexico, they don't drink tap water. They all drink bottled water. You will not, even the people that live in Mexico, they refuse to drink tap water. When you go across the Rio Grande, you can smell the fumes from the gas of the sewer. There's a lot of sewage dumped out there. There's a lot of people that live on the border. A lot of stuff it's not processed properly. And we're drinking it. And we're supposed to be a technologically advanced society. Well, is it just in your water? Well, if you go to the next slide, here's a t-shirt you could wear, and it would be one of the most honest shirts you could ever wear. Because that's the truth. Whether you go into Walmart, Lowe's, Home Depot, you know, it's no respecter of person. Whether you're getting in a taxi, going to a hotel room that hasn't been cleaned for the last 3 uses, you know, wherever you're going or whatever you're doing. If you've noticed one thing, when COVID came out, it was impossible to get, was Lysol. I mean, you couldn't find it anywhere. And now that COVID has kind of went away, well, Lysol's back on the shelf. Not that it went away, but people were buying it so much. These contaminants have been spreading many times. You know, ask your students, how many of you have ever had a stomach virus? And see how many raise their hand. And then pull off a printing from a medical society institute if you want to, or you can just pull offline. Ask them, how did you get the stomach virus? There's only one way. You have to ingest the fecal matter of someone who's contaminated that already had it. If you've ever had a stomach virus, then you've ingested the fecal matter of someone that was contaminated. I dare say about all of us have had a stomach virus. We had in our Peaceful Solutions School here, we had a microbiologist that was with us for a period of time, a really great man. And one day, he, on an experiment and an activity for the students, they swabbed parts of our auditorium, computer keyboards, doorknobs, headphones, just to see how many of these items had fecal matter. All of them did. From that day, we started a rule, you have to bring your own headphones. Who wants to put headphones on their ears knowing that someone else, you know, has spread it? But everything they tested, and it was an enormous amount of stuff, everything tested positive. Now, I want to share with you, this is a place that is wiped down thoroughly every week. And this is way before COVID. It's always been policies of the Peaceful Solution and the auditorium we're allowed to use. It's always been a policy. Everything gets wiped down for hygiene purposes. It's always been that way. And this was a facility that gets cleaned a lot. But you can't control how people that come into the facility conduct themselves. You know, so the policy was started that everyone washes their hands when they come in. And this was long before COVID. But looking over to the next slide, this is what society is going through. You know, these are some what we call third world countries. And looking over to the next slide, imagine living in this is the river that goes between your, you know, your houses or your villages. Well, you think, well, how do people live like that? How do they accumulate that much garbage? We tend to think everybody has a garbage disposal service. Not every country has someone that comes around and picks up your garbage. Not every country has shovels you can readily go buy. Of course, this is also done through a lot of not caring, because there are ways to keep yourself and society clean, but whenever society is taught it doesn't matter, this is a result of it. And we can't blame just third world countries. Looking over to the next slide, you know, here they call it the Greater Pacific. This is the garbage pile, 80,000 tons that is floating. If you've never taken your students, or you yourself have never looked at the size of the amount of plastic in the Pacific Ocean, it is absolutely enormous. And they're still depositing these things. It hasn't stopped. This is what society is doing, taking things, instead of getting, you know, the best thing that society can come up with, and this was the last greatest attempt. Now Sprite is no longer in the green bottle, it's in a clear bottle instead, because the clear bottles are more easy to recycle than the green bottles. And that's what society is coming up with. You know, it always makes me quiver when I go to buy a bottle of, you know, and I'm not bashing these companies. It can be Coke or Pepsi or Dr. Pepper or whoever. But when I see on the side of the bottle, this is made with recycled plastic. You know, and then I start thinking, and it's made with recycled water, recycled plastic. And then I talk myself out of buying it very quickly, and I go look for something else. Because the reality sets in. Well, what about the pollutions and the contaminants we can't see? If you could go to the next slide. You know, these are different viruses. Of course, everyone recognizes COVID. It's been out there for a while now, so everybody sees it. But what about the other ones? E. coli. You know, E. coli it doesn't start in the restaurant, it doesn't start in the store, it starts in the garden where it's processed. A lot of it comes from runoff where contaminated water is, or some of it, we just had a recall on lettuce in the last year in here in Texas that was processed in Chihuahua, Mexico. And of course, I thought it was interesting, why would all the lettuce of Chihuahua, Mexico, why would it have E. coli? And then I found out that when they fertilize their fields, they use human waste. They take human waste, put it with water, and that's what they spray on their fields. And of course, they're making changes down there now because a lot of people got sick and a few people died. But when you think about the contaminants you can see, what about the ones you can't see? You didn't see the fecal matter that got on your hand, that got in your mouth, that gave you a stomach virus. How many people seen the COVID virus that they contracted? Millions and millions and millions of people got COVID. Did they see it? No. But did it contaminate their body? Was it a pollutant that was put out? Yes, it was. Was it man-made? Yes, it was. I'm not saying man-made in a lab in China either. I'm talking about through the conduct of each other. That's how we did it. You know, going to the next slide, some of these things are readily available to see. You know, you see the monkeypox up in the left-hand corner, which is spreading through not just the United States. I was recently in Mexico just a week ago, and I seen a 2-year-old baby that was completely covered with monkeypox. And the most interesting part was the mother of this baby was running a taco stand selling tacos to everybody. Monkeypox is highly contagious. And the baby got it from a relative who was doing some very improper things in his life with his partner, and he got it. He didn't really care about what he was spreading, so he held the baby, had open sores. The baby got babies covered in it. And then the mother had it on her hands, and she had been serving tacos for days to people before she thought, I probably should go get this checked out. Now, I didn't hang around long enough to see how far it had spread after that, but I did want to go see the baby and talk to the woman. And I don't really have a habit of buying tacos from taco stands, so I really wasn't worried about that. But you look over to the right-hand side there, that is a tumor on a young man's eye who has full-blown HIV. And down at the very bottom left-hand corner, that is skin breaking on a young child that was born with HIV. And then the next two, you see what it's like to have gonorrhea in the throat. Can you see down someone's throat when you walk up and shake their hand? No. What about when they coughed in their mouth? Could you imagine that spit coming out of their mouth before they shake your hand? And we want to start blaming things on wood-burning stoves and gasoline We did a great job of spreading COVID all around the world. Yeah, it took jets and it took cars to help get us together a little quicker, but it spread on its own. You can Google, there's a lot of cases. One lady in Charlotte, North Carolina in particular, she had an autoimmune disorder. She barricaded herself in her house and she did not leave her house. The only thing she said she got was a package from the UPS. She still got COVID and she tried to hide from it, but she still got it. You know, looking over to the next slide, these are 3 people all with HIV. If you notice the first lady, her lips in the left-hand column there, her lips are they're in the recovering process because they're crusted over. So they're recovering. If you look at the lady to the right-hand side, it's not just her lips, but also her tongue. There are ulcers and sores. These are live viruses that are living inside of these people's bodies that had to get in there. And then at the very bottom, that's also a man with HIV, and you see the white, they call it kind of the rush or the thrush on the tongue. You can't really see that though until he sticks his tongue out. Probably looks like a fairly healthy man. You know, going to the next slide, this is what everybody in the Peaceful Solution needs to understand. That is not the main cause of contaminants and pollutants that's taking our earth or controlling our earth. You underline that word choices. You don't have to drive a car. That baby that's skin's broke up on its back, covered with HIV, had nothing to do with a car, had nothing to do with combustible fuel, had nothing to do with a wood-burning stove or a jet airplane. It had to do with people making choices who did not believe that these viruses are contaminants and can destroy lives. They didn't respect themselves, and they didn't respect others. And that child is the beneficiary of a lot of bad choices. Can't call them mistakes, and we'll get to that in the Building More Excellence unit. The mistake is, as we use, it's like putting, salt into your coffee instead of sugar, because it was in a container that was similar. It's not a mistake to knowingly do something that can bring you a disease. And this is what we should be teaching society. We're going through and telling everybody by 2030, if we don't do something with fossil fuel, the earth is going to be destroyed. Has anyone looked up heart disease, cancer, HIV, HPV, and actually got into the details to see how many people are already dying? Millions and millions and millions of people are dying. Why is no one saying anything about drinking your own fecal matter or smearing it all around the world? How come we're not having education campaigns to help reduce infection? And I don't mean take a sheet of plastic and cover it up and, now go ahead and do it now. No, teach people how to make better choices. Teach people to live as a society that's governed by laws that keep them safe. Well, we don't do that. We live in a society that actually create laws that say you can do it. We know it's going to kill you, but you can do it anyway. We know it generates monkeypox. We know it creates HIV. We know it creates chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, HPV, herpes, and then the whole plethora, 129 Baskin-Robbins of STDs. We know it does it, but it's your right to do it. Well, that would in itself be okay if that person can make that choice and live their life how they wanted to, but they're going to interact in society, and they're going to spread what they create amongst society. That's where the danger comes in. When you have people that are willingly and knowingly making bad choices, there's no barrier that keeps you safe from them. And if we're doing it, there's no barrier that keeps us from spreading it to everybody else unless we're conscious of what we're doing. Let someone get hepatitis C, and you'll find out how fast it'll spread. I knew a man that This was his words. All I'd done was use the same needle to shoot myself up as that guy used. And now he's living with hepatitis C the rest of his life. He made a bad choice in doing drugs. He goes, I asked the guy, do you have any diseases? How many people do you think have HIV today that don't know it? There's a lot of people. You see them every day where people are saying, I tested positive for HIV, didn't even know I had it. So how many people do they affect throughout their life? Remember pollutants and contaminants. Contaminants, they spread, they destroy. It's more than smoke in the air. And if you want to talk about how things are breaking society down, I dare say the exhaust out of your car has not killed as many people as the influences that come from the sexual innuendos and the insurmountable amount of garbage known as pornography that's put out for people to watch that is destroying society. If you want to talk about real pollution, look at the things society endorses, says it's legal, but they'll ask you if you're 18. And as long as you click that box, you must be 18. No one would lie, No 16-year-old boy or 15-year-old boy would click that box unless he was 18, right? And then they watch all of these things, fill their mind with these things, and then they want to go live these things. No one's telling them the diseases that is being created in this. There's many more pollutants and contaminants that's in our society that's much worse than burning fuels. And I would welcome anyone that's part of the Paris Climate Agreement or those who back the climate agreement of the United States to challenge that. The Peaceful Solution would be glad to openly have a discussion concerning what is destroying this earth. Here on page 189, we're going to see if we can get through this page, and then we'll rehearse some when we have the next class. It says, the question of the day: how do we practice self-control in regards to the environment? We just talked about a lot of things that we can do and things we shouldn't do to protect our environment, the things that are destroying our world. It says, in the previous chapter, you learned that self-control is the ability to stop, think, and make choices that are moral and show value for life. And remember, that was on page 46 when we went through the STOP acronym of your self-control unit. But notice this value for life. And remember, values found on page 6 of the character unit, those are things we deem to be important. Well, health should be one of them. This same concept applies to our environment as well. Everyone in our society, from leaders to policymakers to owners of factories and refineries to ordinary people, must take responsibility for preserving the environment because we are dependent on the earth for all of our needs. And think about what we're doing that makes the earth sick. In order to live, humans, animals, and plants need air, water, food, and sunlight, and the only planet where these needs can be met is Earth. We can't go to Venus, can't go to Jupiter, can't go to Mars. Not going to work for us. In practicing self-control, we must stop and consider, notice we must stop and consider how the choices, once again, there's that word choices, we make as we live our daily lives affect our ability and the ability of others, other life forms to survive and function. With that, think about what we've talked about with these viruses, these diseases, and how easy you can come into contact with these things just through your basic everyday life. I've met older people that refuse to shake hands. They will not shake anyone's hand. And I respect that. I respect that a lot. But some people get really offended if you don't shake their hand. Now you have the elbow bumps, you had the fist bumps. So when everybody's seen COVID come out, that kind of changed things for people. But, we hear the president here lately say the COVID is gone. We're beyond it now. Society just wants to go back to what they were doing to begin with. But I also seen an article that we'll bring next class. One thing that skyrocketed during this time of keeping ourselves, keeping the mask on, keeping ourselves locked up. Well, we didn't lock ourselves up alone because STDs have skyrocketed now. They're higher now than ever before. So we really didn't practice keeping hygiene or keeping ourselves safe from contaminants. And we'll talk about that more in the next class. But, you know, as teachers, please remember to get these things set with the micro kingdoms and the diseases and how society is truly being affected with more than just greenhouse gases. Our next class is going to be this coming Wednesday. It will be at 5:30. So this Wednesday, separate. No, we're going to have class this Wednesday. Yeah, we're going to have it. We're having a huge event here also in Abilene, by the way. So there's going to be a lot of people coming, but we're still going to have class this Wednesday. It'll be September 28th at 5:30 to 6:30. So we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much for joining us.